Good evening and welcome. This is Knox Makers, and thank you for joining us this evening. We are, of course, doing our traditional Tuesday get-together, show and share virtually while the pandemic keeps us at home. We'd like to begin by reminding everyone joining us on the internet that we are open to submissions, not just from our members, but also from the general public. So if you are watching the live stream or the recording later on and you've got a project that you've put together or that you're working on that you'd like to share with our audience, please just email SAS, that's show and share, at knoxmakers.org. Get in touch and we will be happy to get you included in next week's presentation. First up this evening, we've got Sue, who's going to share with us an intriguing thing related to invisible ink.
Ooh, yes, thank you, Isaac. So, all about masks. I'm all about masks. And I had someone very after one of our last show and shares, they wanted a mask. Well, when they got it, their utter disappointment on their faces was unmistakable. They had thought that our logo was on it, and it was not. So, it is on the little baggies. If you've been in the shop, I put them on the baggies, but not on the masks themselves. So I thought, well, that might not be a bad idea. Let's try that. So I did some research on YouTube and found where, go ahead, Isaac, and do the next slide. You could print out, first do a print on paper to make sure everything looks okay. And then there was a series of steps where you cut wax paper the size of a regular sheet of paper. You iron the wax paper onto the fabric. Then you cut the fabric down to the size of the paper. So now you've got fabric with the stiffening of the paper behind it, the wax paper, and you run it through the printer. So what you see in front of you is the paper and the fabric. When it was printed, it looked beautiful, just beautiful. Well, then you need to set the ink. So to do that, you need to put it in a pan, which I chose a glass 9x13 pan, and you add vinegar to it, to the pan. And the vinegar is the old way of getting things to, dyes to stay. When I get a brand new pair of blue jeans, I will wash them with vinegar in the rinse and in the washer to help hold that darker blue or that black color so it doesn't fade. So I'm all set. I got it in my 13 pan. I pour in the vinegar. You need to let it set for 5 minutes. Next slide. And all the ink started disappearing. And this is only after 3 minutes. Isn't that long? So, yeah, disappearing ink. Yes, it certainly was. Fine, okay, I'm scratch that idea. I'm not doing that anymore. So I brought out, go ahead to the next slide, please. A product that I've used quite a bit. Use the light t-shirt transfer. Don't use that unless you're doing it just on white. The reason the fabric color will show through. And this is an example of something that I printed with a printer, and it does just fine. But it's transparent, if you will. So that's why I chose the dark. It should wash many times and be very good. So now that I just printed up some, a few to sample. And if you go to the next slide, you then have to cut them out and place them. As you can imagine, for those little 1/2-inch squares, it can be really hard to take the edge of it and try and release the paper off the back. So this is where a tip I found, you can use a regular straight pin. I don't know if you can see that. Or better yet, some scissors, scratch the paper on the back enough where you can get your fingernail under it, fold it in half, and then peel it off. Works great. So then you place it on the mask with the parchment paper that's provided. And you hold it, for this particular product, it's 20 seconds. And you're done. So next slide. Voila. One of the reasons why it's so small, trying to stay on a flat part of the mask where you don't, as the hump is the wire and then the pleats below. And this is actually a picture where I just placed it, but I thought, it's close enough. Now, if you zoom out, we talked about repurposing things. One thing you have to do is do it on a hard surface, not on your regular ironing board. And I just happened to have a piece of 1x12 that had been cut, measured and cut twice and still way too short for the intended project. So I now have claimed my 2-foot long 1x12 to set on my ironing board, so I have a nice hard surface. And then I've just put a piece of flannel on it to help protect both the wood and the mask. And that's it. That's my project.
This came out looking really nice, Sue.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to whatever's left at the space. I'm going to be ironing the emblems on them as well.
Nice.
Could sneak up behind people and quick iron things on the back of their shirts.
Ooh.
Well, that would be surprising, wouldn't it? Take this opportunity to remind the members in the audience that thanks to Sue's efforts, we do provide the fabric face masks to any members who require them. You'll find those on the hospitality table just inside the workshop. So remember, of course, that we do require face masks in the shop. So if you need one, thanks to Sue, we got you covered. Thanks again, Sue.
You're welcome. And there's plenty if you need them for your spouse or your family. It's becoming mandatory now.
That is very cool of you to supply them. All right. So next up, we've got Amos joining us, and he has got an update on his battery adapter project, I believe.
Hello. Let's see.
Hey.
Here. There we are. Hi. So, yeah, last week I shared some initial stages of a battery adapter. And the short summary is I saw a tool from a company. I do not really have any other tools from that ecosystem, and I'm pretty well bought into one ecosystem. And so I thought I'm going to adapt the batteries I have to work with that other ecosystem. And I found some similar models that were almost what I wanted online and adapted them in theory and saw them fail and then refined them. And at the as of last show and share where I initially debuted what I was doing, I was just printing the refined version. Well, I printed the refined version and it had a couple problems with it, but they were so minor that I was able to Dremel it to the now finalized version and just like add a little bit of glue and fix it. So if you go to the first slide, you can see kind of the finished result that I ended up with. And it has some springs from the inside of a pen to spring out the little clips, and the clips grab into the Ryobi tools, and it has a little circuit on the left that will cycle through displaying what the voltage is across the individual cells on the inside of the battery, and then the combined voltage also. And if any one of those gets low to a set point that you define for each of the individual cells, it'll start beeping at you quite annoyingly. So if you go to the next slide, that's what I did for the contacts on the top. So I bought a piece of brass. I think that's like 0.2, like 20 thou brass or something like that. and soldered that to a blue spade terminal that I dissolved the plastic off of with acetone. And then I soldered the cable into the spade terminal rather than crimp it, because if you crimp it, it will deform the metal a little bit. And that's for reference, I think that's about a 12 gauge wire that I have, silicone insulated wire, and which is actually a lot larger than the wire on the inside of the battery. And then if you go to the next slide, you can see where it stuck into the model that I designed on the top, which honestly was where my second biggest frustrations with the projects came from. But it works and it feels really good in the drill now. And then the next slide, you can see where the biggest frustration was. In the model itself, there just wasn't enough allowance at the bottom to comfortably fit all the wires, and it was just a very tight fit. And there was just a tiny bit of play. Like it was very difficult to cut the brass to the perfect length or width that you need, so that there's no play and that it wants to perfectly line up into the slots on the battery. So what I ended up doing was on the bottom bit, I crimped the 12 gauge wires to some Anderson power pole connectors, and then I had some other mating connector. Well, they're genderless connectors, but I had some the same connector color on the top and bottom, and then they snapped together, and then it all was supposed to screw together. And then I plugged the battery in just to hold the terminals in the right place, and then dumped a bunch of 2-part epoxy on the top to stabilize them so then they can't move. But while I was screwing on the top, I just had it lightly screwed down, so that way it would hold in the connectors, and then I could just adjust it a little bit later. And if you go to the next slide, some of the glue just seeped in and filled in that void there. So now I can't screw it down, but it's also very rigid and it's plenty strong. It just has a crack in it, and it won't sit perfectly flat to the drill anymore. But the little yellow clip still clips into the drill just fine. And on the top of on the top piece that holds the clip from just springing out, that was modified in the geometry to be at the right height. But rather than reprint that for a third time, rather than making a third print of it, I just dremeled it down and then rebuilt back up the surface, built up a ledge with epoxy, and that worked reasonably well. So, and if you go to the next slide, that's the little circuit board. So on the far right is the negative terminal, and then it just goes sequentially through the cells, and however many cells that circuit board finds, it will automatically add up and tell you the sum of the voltage. And then there's the button on the top, which you can press, and that will change the trigger point anywhere between 3 and 4 volts in like 0.1 increments. And that if any of the cells goes below the set point, it will beep at you. Interestingly, even though the battery chemistry on the inside of the DeWalt batteries has a nominal voltage of 4.2, they only fully charge them to 4.08. So that's a pretty healthy ceiling, which means that theoretically their longevity should last many years. I'm not a very heavy power tool user because I'm not a contractor or anything, but theoretically it should last a long time with that much overhead. Anyway, on the next slide, we have it plugged in and turned on, and it's showing the sum voltage in that photo. And on the next slide, it shows it on a tool. And so this was the tool that sparked my interest. Is I wanted an unencumbered hot glue gun so I could run around maniacally laughing, gluing everything to the wall with nothing to stop me.
As you do.
Yes, as one does. And then on the next 2 slides, if you go kind of quickly back and forth, you can see the things sort of click in a little bit, but it's kind of hard to see. It's very subtle, but it does click into the tool. So that's basically it on that project. It took, I'll say though, cutting that brass and shaping it down and then getting it soldered in and then having the wrapping wire not break from strain as you're putting it in, that was the hardest part that took forever on the project. So I think for reference, what I think a improvement to this design would be is ditch the brass on the top, only use the spade terminals, like refine it so the spade terminals are all you need, and then yeah, so you'd have to hold them a little bit differently. And then for the contacts on the bottom, brass is quite expensive. So if you get like a 5x5 sheet locally, it could cost you, of that gauge, it could easily cost you $30. It's so expensive. If you go get just one of those cheap converters online that already has perfect terminals on it, it'll cost you like $17 on eBay. So I think it would have been better to just plan on buying one of those and then repurposing the contacts from it, but just adding in the low voltage alarm, because none of those have them. So anyway, but I don't want to go through that design work. This design almost already existed in a perfect form. So.
Well, it looks like
done
that was ultimately really successful. Have you had a chance to put it through its paces yet?
I turned it on. It heated up in about 40 seconds, and it was pumping out tons of glue just fine. And just like a normal hot glue, as all good hot glue guns should, it will sit there and drip when it's not like a tiny bit because of what's still left over on the end. I haven't, unfortunately, the hot glue gun does not have like a little motorized retraction like a 3D printer thing. I mean, I really wish somebody would make a hot glue gun with like a stepper motor or something that would retract but was still like compact. That'd be awesome. But it is just it's one of those simple trigger feed things. But yeah, it turned on, heated up just fine, and with the appropriate hot glue, you can do quite a bit with it.
The Sure Bonder industrial ones use a check valve to keep it from leaking like that.
Yeah. I don't know how you would do it though, because it doesn't leak a lot, but it will drip just like that last little bit at the very end of the brass, because it's a large diameter, and so it's just like once it's sitting there melting, it's pretty tough to prevent. But yeah, very neat.
Well, thanks for sharing that with us. That's really groovy.
Yeah, and I'll be sure to post a link to the files as soon as I get them on Thingiverse, but it might be like one more day of tiny bit of cleanup, but yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks, Amos. So next up, we have Tracy joining us with some sort of undefined 5-minute craft, and I'm intrigued.
I picked this because I wanted to lower the bar for making things. They don't have to always be like well thought out over weeks and weeks of time, and with CAD drawings and mistakes. And it can just be like, I'm sitting on my couch and I get an inspiration and I make the thing, and then it is good enough and I love it. So if you'll go to my first slide, my only slide, I play cribbage and my pegs were gone. So I was using pipe cleaners, which were terrible because they would bend and then the fuzz would come off and then they'd poke you, and it was really bad. And I was like, I'm going to think this out, and I'm going to go to Billy's lathe class and make my own metal pegs, and it's going to be amazing, and they're going to be beautiful, and I will glue jewels to them or something. And then I never took Billy's lathe class because now we're not allowed to do anything at all. And I never went and researched any types of metal, but I did have tiny pieces of thin wood sitting in my scrap pile, and I had a pocket knife, and I'm like, I'm just gonna whittle some pegs for myself. So here's my craft, and I didn't even like go outside and do it cleanly. I just like did it in my living room and swept up the shavings later. And then I sanded them, and then I put some butcher block oil on them because that's what I had, and they work fine, and they're way better than pipe cleaners. So those are my temporary pegs for my cribbage board until I take Billy's fancy lathe class and make fancy ones. So it maybe took 10 minutes, not 5. That's my project for the day. So anything you make is acceptable for show and share. No, I didn't need any bandages, Mom. I did not cut myself even one time. It was just like I made sure I was always cutting away from myself. I did not hurt myself. I maybe sawed through my table a little, but it's fine. It's fine. That's my project. That's all I got.
Well, that seems very practical and worthwhile and sufficient to the purpose. And I think it's a valuable lesson to those of us who overthink things brutally. I mean, not me, but those people who do, though.
Right.
Thank you for sharing that. And next up, we have Billy, who is going to share something about watermarking photographs.
Hey everyone. So me and the wife do other hobbies, and one of the hobbies she does is animal rescue. And being the IT people we are, we help support the rescues information needs. And one thing that's happened is that we've implemented some software for them to do to help publish and promote their animals. You go to the first slide for me. Well, this is Tigress, and poor Tigress, well, nobody knows who she is because she has no information on there. They don't know where to get her because she has no watermark or anything on it to differentiate what shelter that she's in. So if you go to the next slide, that's their logo, rather blown up. And if you go to the next, and this is some code. Some of this code I found online, but then I went and added some extra stuff to it. The first part of it from the break up is all stuff that I found online. But the problem is when we use this program, I want it to be able to work so that you can type in any length of name, and it properly sizes the font to fit in the proper space. So what I'm doing here is I'm looping through, that for loop is looping through and trying different sizes of, or incrementally increasing the font size until it fits within the boundary of the specified width. And at that point, then it stops, drops the font by 10 points, and then sets everything, and then re-overlays the font. And then the next thing we had to do was do some strokes. We're using white text over black stroke, but there's no easy function for that. So the way around this was to basically offset the font by a certain amount of pixels in all 8 directions: up, down, left, right, and all the upper left, upper right, lower left, lower right, and basically just kind of smear the font around and then overlay a white copy on top of it. And if you go to the next slide, and that's the result. So now Tigress has her name on there, and we've got the Mark logo on the image, and now they can upload it to all their social media. Well, that was just one part, is making this little module and getting it working, and I'm going to demonstrate that here in just a second. If I can have presenter so I can share my desktop.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was. Not sharing.
I saw it both say that your screen share had started and then immediately ended.
That's what I saw. There we go. Okay, so here's the code again. Now I'm going to run the watermark as a standalone. I'm going to do Mrs. I got to put it quotes. Mrs. Pitter Patter. And as you can see, it's dynamically sized the text to fit in the space. I'm going to do a smaller one. There, it's much bigger for Joe. So it adjusts the font size correctly to whatever we want to put in there. Next step was to integrate it into their software. So they use something here called Animal Shelter Manager, which I've set up and I'm hosting for them. And as you can again see, here's poor Tigger, or Tigress, and she's got her photo, but no watermarking. So I went in and I coded worked with the application and added a nice little button here, and we can click this button. And of course, it's not going to work now. Okay, well, I had it working, and as everything happens, it fails on demo. But I had it working so that when you clicked it on it, it automatically comes up for us. I should have tested this. All right, one more time. No, I don't know what's going on. I'll have to figure it out here in a minute. But anyway, I integrated it into their software so that when they click on it and hit that little button up there, it runs it through the processor also and re-uploads it to the site so that then it can be published out to all the different pet adoption agencies, and therefore has their watermarks as they need it. And it saves Tiffany a step from having to go into her phone and try to watermark it and such, and then upload the photo. So she can just upload the photo and then click that, and we're good to go. And that's all I got.
There may be no greater act of bravery in my mind than volunteering to do a live software demo. I have never seen one go correct, I don't think, ever in my life. But that looks like a really handy thing that you made.
Well, thank you. At least the command line version worked.
All right. Well, if you'll give me my superpowers back, please. Yes, there is a German word for failure sparked by a live demo, isn't there? I actually think I ran across that at some point. Yeah, well, I wouldn't be able to pronounce it anyway, so it's a good thing that that's not happening. At any rate, yes, they have words for all the things. Next up, we have Brian, who is going to share with us his bench. It just so happens that I've seen this bench, and it is wonderful.
Hey guys.
Hey, Brian.
If you think back a long time ago, I did a show and share of a two-legged table I built. And as it turned out, that table is a very non-standard size. So it's not quite the height of a countertop, and it's definitely taller than a regular table. So standard chairs do not fit at it. Either you're, sitting like a king above it, or you feel like a child sitting almost, beneath it. So I had to build a bench dedicated for it. So this is my bench. I'm gonna go to the pictures.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're quite out of order. I want to go ahead and jump through a couple. I'll try to get to the beginning of it here. Well, there's the bench. Those are the ends of them. I'll keep going. Okay, maybe there's only a couple. Anyways, that's the bench I built. Go back one more. I built it with these little standoffs on it to try to give a couple more shadow lines on it. That top is about 2 inches thick. I held the rails to the legs with a dovetail joint, so you can't actually see it, but it's there. Just for fun, I cut half of them on the router table, and I cut the other half by hand. The ones I cut by hand actually turned out a lot nicer, and it was way faster. So I'll continue doing that in the future. I actually built 2 of these things, but I ran out of material, or at least I haven't milled up the material for the other one yet. So there's one half finished still hanging around the shop. Go back one more.
Sorry, would you mind saying more about the shadow lines? That's interesting. What is that?
Well, so I could have put the top directly onto the legs, but instead you see there's like a 3/4 inch standoff with a nickel plated spacer there. And by doing that, you see 2 more lines when you see it from the side. So it's more aesthetically pleasing by adding these extra shadow lines. So that was the thought, but incredibly sturdy. Aesthetically, I think I splayed the legs a little bit more than I would have liked. So I may go back and rebuild the base for this and the other one actually, and do it with maybe half of the rake on the legs. I think it splays, I think, like 15 degrees in one direction and 18 the other. I think the correct answer is probably more like, I don't know, 7 or 8 degrees. So that's probably what I'll do in the future. Go back one more picture. I'll show you. It's important how the top goes on. So the top is going to expand and contract in width by quite a bit. So that top is about 13 and a half inches across. So it's going to move quite a bit from summer to winter. And the base is going to be, more or less fixed. So you fix it to the top with these little figure eights, and you attach one side of the figure eight to the bottom and the other side to the top. And if you do it on an angle like this, they just twist and rotate as that top gets bigger or smaller. So it keeps it from tearing it apart. So you really want to do something like that with every solid top that you ever put on something. So it's important to point out. But yeah, that's the most of it. The other thing I'd say about it is we don't have our new jointer done yet. But if we did, this board that I made this out of would still be too big for it. So I actually did all of the milling on this by hand. So that was one really sweaty day working in the shop. It was just pouring off me hitting this with hand planes. So, but you can see it there next to my two-legged table.
It looks amazing.
Yeah, thanks. But yeah, I guess while I have everyone here, there's some updates going in the wood shop. So I apologize that you have to work around that for the next week or so. We're getting a new chop saw in tomorrow. We'll have a new miter saw station. It'll be functional probably this week. It'll be done within the next 2 weeks. I have to put some more storage into it. But it's pretty well set up right now. So if you go in and wonder what that thing is over against the side, that's what it's going to be. So
I really like your new layout tables with the laminate tops and the craft paper dispensers. That seemed really cool to me.
Yeah, thanks. We just needed some more room to work. So hopefully with all the other stuff we have going in, we'll open up a bunch more room in that area. It's very oddly laid out as we have it right now. So hopefully we can optimize it a little more. We got to get some hand tool benches put in so we can start doing classes on that. But yeah, good things are coming.
I certainly appreciate all your vision in reworking that for Knox Makers. It's really dynamite, man.
I'm excited about it. It'll be fun.
Great. Thanks a lot, brother. All right, friends, a few announcements to share with you this evening before we close. At our last board meeting, we had a discussion regarding the status of our usually annual Kill Switch robotic combat event. And we decided to go ahead and postpone this year's tournament until next year. We felt like that, is continuing to set dates and then have to reset dates potentially as the pandemic runs its course would be a frustration for everyone. So it's a disappointment for everybody, I think, but I think it's the most sensible thing. So we're going to revisit that next year, and hopefully in April, I believe, we will try and pull together the Kill Switch tournament as we had intended to do this year. Upcoming, we have a experimental electronics class. What you're looking at here, this is a circuit board that Ray, our deputy electronic czar, designed for us. It is a thematically appropriate blinky coronavirus, which is threatening or friendly according to your perceptions, I suppose. It is a relatively easy through-hole soldering kit. So if you are interested in learning to solder, if you're interested in getting some practice in soldering, or if you just like to solder stuff and you want to hang out with some fellow Knox Makers community members and solder, this may be for you. We're going to do something a little bit different this time. When you sign up for this class, you're paying for the materials cost, and you'll actually get the kit in the mail. And then we will get together here using the Big Blue Button video conferencing server, and we will hang out virtually and solder together. I will be leading that build along, and there will be several folks helping out in case anybody gets stuck. The class itself is going to happen on August the 5th, which is a Wednesday, but you'll need to go ahead and sign up, and so we can get the kit in the mail to you if you want to do that. And this is open for anybody who wants to do it. I think it'll be a good time. So go ahead and sign up at knoxmakers.org/events if that sounds like a good time to you. We also have scheduled a new member onboarding session, and that will be taking place next Wednesday, which is the 29th at 7 p.m. The new members onboarding is an opportunity to learn a little bit about the culture of Knox Makers and about the kinds of expectations and rules that we have for community members. If you are currently a probationary member, you are strongly encouraged to attend. If you are already a member, but you've never been to such a meeting, you're certainly welcome. Anybody who wants to can come to the new members onboarding. It's a swell time. Swell time, not guaranteed. Also, our project for making anti-coronavirus face shields is heating up again. As the numbers have spiked throughout the state, we've seen an uptick in requests from various organizations for face shields, and we want to be able to continue to meet those requests. So if you've got a 3D printer and you are willing to contribute, it would be super swell if you would get involved. We have the open source pandemic response channel in Mattermost. So just join up, and that's where we do all the sort of organizing and logistics type stuff. And I think we may be getting a little bit of supplies or money for supplies coming in, so you don't necessarily have to underwrite it yourself, although if you're willing to, that's extra good. So help us help the community, make face shields, build goodwill, all that sort of jazz. Finally, let me just pitch once more that anyone can show and share at our weekly event, member or no. If you are watching this on the internet, recorded version, you are welcome to email SAS, that's show and share, at knoxmakers.org, and share with us your projects. Give us some images and that sort of thing, and we can get you set up for next week. So thus concludes our formal proceedings. If you'd be so kind as to stop the recording.